Welcome to Thinking Through the Darkness, a Lore by Spec podcast, with me, your host, Spec. This is a podcast where we talk through all of the pre-production that goes into making the theories that you see on the Lore by Spec channel and its associated channels. Let's get the shilling out of the way first. If you haven't gone and subscribed and liked and commented on the videos on Lore by Spec on the YouTube channel, please go ahead and do that now. That's one of the best ways that you can support me. This podcast is also available anywhere that you can find podcasts. So if you are listening, if you could like the podcast and maybe leave a little review, that does wonders for the algorithm on the podcast side, which really helps. And if you want to help support this podcast, this is the only one that currently doesn't use free tools. And since it's a paid thing, if you have the means to contribute to this, the link for this is in my description for my Ko-Fi. This helps me keep the light on and pay for all of the things that go into making this podcast a quality project. When I think about my top games of all time, I think about the games that I return to regularly and don't get bored of. For narrative games, that's kind of difficult to do for the most part because there's generally only one real story that you get to go down. Kingdom Hearts is a great example of this. You can play Kingdom Hearts many times over, but by and large, each set piece is largely the same. A franchise where that doesn't play out the same way at all is Dragon Age. I love Dragon Age, and I don't think it's one of those things of I get to platform that affection that I have with the franchise all that much. I did a video when I first started this channel of what happened to Dragon Age the Veilguard because it was such a radical departure from what we had wanted and what we had expected from Dragon Age, and given just the sheer volume of years that have gone by between Inquisition and Veilguard, it's not really all that surprising that what we got from the Veilguard was substantially lackluster in comparison to the depth that we know the franchise can go through. It went from being one of those franchises and series that was so diverse and so expansive and so unique, that had such a depth, not just in its lore, but its gameplay and its just the body of work that you have to go with. And as I said in my video, it's a very competent game, but it's for people who don't want complexity that Dragon Age has to offer. Its battle systems are arguably reduced to bushing mashing. There's no real tactical depth to it in the way that you would expect a Dragon Age game to play and feel. And the fact that you only are reduced down to 3 companions instead of, a minimum of 4 says a lot that they were trying to streamline and in many ways minimize a lot of the interaction that you had between your characters. And it was a real shame because I couldn't tell you anything that's wrong with the Veilguard. Played well, it's handled well, it was very competent. Its worlds were nice, but it was very linear, I didn't feel alive in the same way that we have known Dragon Age places to be. And I think it would have been a very competent, very good RPG if it just didn't have the Dragon Age title attached to it. And that's a real shame, because my favourite game is Inquisition. Now, people who are Dragon Age fans would akin me liking Inquisition to liking 2, the same way Fallout fans would think I've just said Brotherhood of Steel was my favourite game. So Dragon Age folks do have a tendency to look at me when I say that and be like, what are you talking about? Because it's not Origins, right? Everybody will tell you that. The first is the best, and arguably, in many ways, I'd agree with that. But in my world, I've always been a console player. And there is no modern console that you can play the original Origins on. That's just the reality of the world that I live in, guys. There's no way you're playing Origins on a PS5 or a Switch, right? It's not happening. And for my sins, I was far more invested in the story of Inquisition than I was. One, Duncan didn't get enough time in 1. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of standout story beats in 1. You have Kirkwall, and you have wherever you started from, depending on whether or not you ended up in the slums or whether you ended up saying goodbye to your family. You have that great start with the Illuvians. It's like, there's so much that Origin does right in order to earn the legacy that it stands upon. But in terms of depth, when it comes to the interconnection between characters, Inquisition is the one that really stole my heart. And I think that does come down to the characters. We do have a lot of people returning from the franchise Inquisition. Leliana is back as our spy master, when in Origins she was she was technically a sister from the Chantry, but she was an assassin. But now she has grown, and she's now the left hand of the Divine before the Conclave happened. The Conclave falling apart is such a great way of introducing not just the stakes of what do you do about a hole in the sky, but it sets such a pivotal thing in motion of people who should be on the same side fracturing against each other. How Cassandra has to basically invoke the writ from the Seekers of an Inquisition that somebody needs to take charge of it, and she doesn't really want to invoke that. Nobody really wants to invoke that. But she does. There is not a single person, except maybe Varric, who, out of your suite of people who you can have an Inquisition, there's not a single one who has been left out of an arc, out of some semblance of personal development. And Trespasser, the DLC at the end, is just the perfect end cap to what already was a fantastic story. Like, you have Cullen, who is breaking through not only his struggle with his background as a Templar in this environment where he's aware mages are necessary in order to defeat Corypheus. Like, he knows they're essential, but he's weaning himself off the lyrium. And he has to make some interpersonal choices as to whether or not, regardless of whether you're romancing Cullen or not, as to whether or not he survives that addiction. And in the bad ending, he does not. Like, he ends up dead and destituted. Scout Harding finds him in a street, in a back alley, in the bad ending for Cullen. right? Things can go so badly awry post-game for your cast of characters. We have Cassandra who's herself, who can either become divine, re-establish the Seekers, or something else entirely. Everybody has such unique paths. Leliana herself can either be divine or remain as a spy master. Her arc, especially in Trespasser, where when you well, it's actually not in Trespasser. Is it in Trespasser? No, it's not in Trespasser. It's when you meet Dorian if you decide to go to Redcliffe to meet with the Treventers, and they end up back in time, or a different timeline where Griffith has won, essentially. And you end up finding Leliana, and she is still alive, but has been tormented for years, tortured for years. And she was just like, while this is fake to you, this has all been real to us. Like, you need to respect that. I understand that you got to go home, but we cannot go home. And like, it's just a masterclass. This is me like off the cuff remembering stuff. I don't do any research going into these podcasts. I just sit here, turn on the mic, and go. Right. And that scene still just lives in my head of the impact. Because, like, how can you quantify watching not just your rebellion fall apart, but the entire planet be overcome? You're one of the only remaining cognizant survivors, and you are being relentlessly tortured for the rest of the remainder of your existence. I personally couldn't fathom that as an existence, but Leliana is strong enough mentally in her fortitude that she continues. Like, ultimately, your friends, your party members buy you time to let you go back in time when Dorian sets up that portal, even though they know that they'll die in this specific timeline. Aching stuff. It's aching stuff. Then you have the wonderful Josephine, who's not just battling with trying to be the diplomat for something that is inherently undiplomatic, and trying to do what is the impossible, which is that diplomatic dance. Haven is on stolen land, technically, before they move to Skyfold. And doing that dance with everybody, then working out when you move through the game, you gain favor, you're in the war room, you're helping out certain factions, lending certain, whether it's your spy master, whether it's Cullen, whether it's Josephine, to navigate different paths. And she has to, in the background, curry all of those favors and make sure that everybody's happy, even though you are essentially massing the biggest army this side of Ferelden. Insane political work, and even in Trespasser, she has to be the one to be like, yeah, the Inquisitor isn't here because, well, somebody tried to bomb the peace talks. So, don't got much for you here, committee. And she's got to hold that on her own. Like, what's Cullen going to do in this specific instance? Like, not much. You know what I mean? Like, he's not the man for the job. But they're so good, that core group in your war, to tie everything together. And the thing is about all of them is that there is not a shred of doubt when you are in there that they are not the right people for the job. Like, they are so well written and so well executed. Cullen is out there in Haven training with his men. Josephine is always in her office writing letters with her aides, talking through negotiation, putting things together, putting things in motion. Leliana is always up in the spiral, making sure messages are getting sent, establishing her network. They are always present doing what they should be doing, so there's never any doubt of their competencies. It's it's superbly executed. It's superbly well executed if you think about it. You shouldn't just be able to wander in and see them all doing their stuff. Programmatically, it's very easy to do. You just keep them in one place, but there's always cutscenes. There's always bits. You can always ask questions. You can always get further engagement to ask them what they've been doing, and there is content around that every time you ask. An amazing level of depth, and that's just in the people who you don't even go adventuring with, right? These are just the people holding this stuff together with you. This says nothing to the depth that goes into your teams. The brilliant thing about Inquisition, which the Veilguard doesn't capture, is that you can tell everybody in Inquisition would not be in the same room together under any other circumstance. Right? You can't tell me Vivienne and Sera end up frequenting the same places. That might be a small lie. Sera might be there to rob them, right? But otherwise, absolutely not. Not a chance. You couldn't tell me that half of these people wouldn't interact unless there was some sort of crisis like this to pull them up together. Because it's unreasonable otherwise. Varric, I can understand just trying to get away from Kirkwall. You know, he's just trying to avoid his responsibilities, like Varric always does. And he's sort of beholden to Cassandra because he's refusing to give up Hawk. Which, you know, that's a very Varric thing to do. Iron Bull, being a mercenary, he was also Talbashah because they want to know what's happening over here. Being Ben Hassar comes with its own consequences. And to see Bull develop is so good in Inquisition because he's always been very open-minded. And not only does he accept the trans people in his company, because he's just like, what are you talking about? The Q, and we don't discriminate against that kind of thing. So, don't know what you're talking about. It never discriminated against that kind of thing. Why would it bother me? To a point that if you betray the charters in favor of the Q coming in to help, Bull keeps that in his back pocket to betray you at the end of trespassing. What an astonishing piece of writing for something that happens so early in the game. Like, this happens in the first few hours of the game. Like, you do not leave Haven before this happens, right? What an astonishing thing to keep in your back pocket just because you betrayed the Chargers, just because Bull doesn't like you by the end. And he'll keep calling you boss to your face. You can even be lovers with him, but if you betray the Chargers, that's it. But he has always been for his men first, which is very Ben Hastra. But the Chargers are his family, and you betrayed his family. And worse, you made him betray his family. And he simply sits on that. And he sits on that until the DLC is over. It's so good. It's so well written. Vivienne, coming from this place of power and prestige and elegance and being high enchantress to a point of where she can be positioned herself to be divine, having so much power and so much intrigue, is beautiful for how she moves in Orlais. It's very appropriate Orlais behavior. But you realize that there's a side of her where, when she finds out that her lover has died, and that regardless of whether or not you get that snowy wyvern heart for her or not, there's nothing that she can do. And she has to you watch her hold that balance of her grief versus the position that she feels the standard she must uphold. Of course, she brings people in who were with the Duke's sister, etc., to Skyfall because it's magnificent. It's where Vivienne resides. She's seen as still while grieving, this grand seat of power with all this influence. And what a delicate dance that is to witness play out. Let's see who you have. You have the whole mystery with Blackwall of him masquerading essentially as a warden for years because a warden once saved his ass, essentially. And this was the only thing that he felt he could do to atone. And by the end, comes to this relationship with the Inquisitor of being so inspired by what the Inquisition has done with what the Inquisitor has done and what they have overcome and faced, that he must go and repent in Orlais to save another one of his many lives. And how we have a choice as to whether or not we're going to let him be put to the death, or whether we are going to, as the Inquisition, use our political intrigue to get him out. I have always gotten him out because I believe redemption is possible. But Blackwall is the perfect embodiment of there is always room to change if you want to change. If you feel like you have it in you to change, there is hope for you to change. But you have to be willing to act on it, because sorries are not enough. And you must spend your time atoning. But at a certain point in time, after that period of atonement, and it should, by its definition, only be to a point where you can look at yourself in the mirror and be like, I am a different person than who I was now. And therefore, I am making better choices, doing different things. And I will spend my life in the constant pursuit of my own excellence in order to serve others. And that is what Tom has always done. That is what Rainier has always done. And continues to do in my playthroughs. And that's such a beautiful conversation about how you can only ever really beat yourself up for so long in service of doing the right thing before you just start to do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. And at what point can you, in the words of Sleep Token, can you ever forgive yourself? Have you done enough? And at what point does that self-flagellation become self-serving? Because at some point it has to not be. You know, at some point you don't gain anything from beating yourself up anymore. Because you've already turned the corner. Now, if Tom was to ever have faced the victims of any of the people who he had previously hurt, I'm pretty sure that they'd allow them to take a swing at him. You know? But if you've changed, the question here is, do you need to continue to atone? If you have paid your dues, for want of a better description, do you need to continue to atone in not just the eyes of society, but do you need to atone to yourself? So it's a wonderful commentary on forgiveness. You have Sera, who's just bananas. The girl is banana sandwiches. You cannot convince me otherwise. I will not be hearing any notes on Sera. She is banana sandwiches. But the perfect amount of banana sandwiches because she's traumatized. She's traumatized. She's perpetually scared, which manifests itself as anger. She doesn't know how to articulate herself well in that anger. She regrets and laments her relationship with her mom, the absence of her father, and how the Red Jennies have served as this gap of believing that fundamentally people are good. That more often than not, people are good and want to chip in, want to do the good, the right thing. And she's a real example of how at least for me, about how your neurodivergence is a blessing and a curse. Because I'm sure I'm Sera to some people who I've met in my life. But I empathize with Sera a lot because she's genuinely in a lot of pain. And I don't think people ever really get that assessment of her, that she's just confused and scared and feels trapped most of the time. Varric is hard to discuss in a vacuum for Inquisition because you have so much of two happening. I feel sorry for Varric 9 times out of 10. He's a very good writer, but he has been pushed into situations that he would much prefer that he did not. Like ending up becoming Viscount of Kirkwall and just not wanting to deal with, the name of the big cities underground escaped my brain at the minute, but not wanting to deal with the trading guilds and all of the politics that come with being Viscount, and just his very complicated relationship with Bianca. Do I feel that Bianca feels the same way for Varric as Varric feels for Bianca? Largely, no. I mean, she is married to someone else by Inquisition. She is, in many ways, I mean, let's face it, there was basically a war that was held over the two of them essentially shacking up together. So, let's not start a Carter war under the circumstances. But they could have. They chose not to, but they could have. In many ways, I think things probably would have turned out better if they did. Lord knows Ozma could have used a bit of a shake-up. Ozma! Oh my god, brain, you're remembering the city. Good job. But she is not as, or at least she is further along that acceptance path of the fact that they cannot be together and will never be able to be together than Varric is. Varric has no romance options with anyone or anything, ever. It has always just been her. And I cannot fathom what that must feel like. I mean, I've loved and I've lost, as I'm sure many people have who I've talked to, but I don't know if I could look at my hypothetical partner, someone who I love more than anything, but we've decided that we couldn't be together, and yet I could still maintain being that close of friends that she's able to come to Skyhold and report in about the red lyrium and all the rest, and I couldn't do it. For me, it could never be enough for us to just be friends. And I can't imagine what shame Varric must be in being around Bianca. Am I sure that time eventually numbs out a lot of these things? Sure. But his crossbow is named Bianca, and you cannot convince me otherwise. He has not let go. He might have in some way accepted it, but I guess he's a better man than me, because I know that I couldn't. Varric acts as the linchpin for most of my parties. And while I'll go into kind of chatting about how everybody interacts once I'm done with the kind of general recap, Varric is essential to making a lot of the minor plots work. Then we have my beloved Dorian. I love Dorian. I love Dorian so much. Not only because he is a queer man escaping from a patriarchal system who wanted to make sure that he kept the bloodline going against his wishes. But having that dialogue in the mill in Redcliffe, where he is just going at his dad to be like, you've never accepted me for who I am. You essentially just wanted to breed me out. You have not come here for peaceful talks. You have just come here to spout the same stuff you've always had. And how the Chantry's presence in Skyhold through a nun who names very well and in general has always been like a point of where you could confide in her, in Mother Giselle, was a point of real antagonism when it comes to Dorian, because she has her own biases with him, A, being Trevinter, and B, being gay. And how you in many ways get to be like, and who's spreading those rumors? And she's like, sorry about that. And like, Dorian was a fantastic, like, that was written from someone very frustrated in BioWare who has seen a lot of stuff when it comes to coming out to people who won't accept you either way. And I felt that from my heart. Felt that from the depths of my heart. So I always just let Varric, or I just always let Dorian have it out. 100% just let him have it. Then we have dear beloved Cole, who, by his nature of entering into this world as a spirit, not actually knowing what spirit he is, until closer to the end, he turns out to be a spirit of compassion. Whether or not he wishes to remain a spirit, or whether he wishes to be human, is a choice that I leave up to the gods of my playthrough. Because it is another kind of similar conversation of self-determination, of a little bit reflective in Tom Rainier, where he is atoning so much to be someone else because he hated who he was. Cole's story is more along the lines of, I am at a threshold where I have been exposed to so much that does this become, what road do I go down from here? And it's a lovely moment where in Cole's epilogue, if he decides to become human, he ends up going off with the bard in the tavern. And if he doesn't, he facilitates a lot of people to fall in love as a spirit. which is a wonderful thing to do and a wonderful kind of end to his story. Outside of Solas, who am I missing? Deliberately Googling this because I don't want to accidentally forget somebody. Obviously, Scout Harding in in uh, in Veilguard is great because I can't get enough of Scout Harding. She's brilliant. I actually might not be missing anybody. Did I get everybody on the first try except for Solas? Who, let's be honest, needs to be lost. I'm looking at an image. Solas, Varric, Dorian, Cass, Sera, Vivienne Iron Ball. Oh, yeah, I know, that's right. Haha, look at me. Solas, my dear, my dear, my dear, my dear, sweet Solas. Why were you turned dirty in the Veilguard, given everything that you have been through in Inquisition? Yes, he was the person who ended up being the reason why Inquisition happened in the first place, because Corythius got his bloody orb. But the journey that Solas goes through in Inquisition is wonderful because he opens up. And if your Inquisitor is an elf who romances Solas, it ends up becoming the best ending in the Veilguard because the Inquisitor ultimately does follow through with what she says at the end of Trespasser, which is, I will not give up on you. We will go through this together. When he is revealed to be Dreadwolf. But you see Solas begin to learn to open up to people, to let people in, to really consider others friends, to enjoy other people's companies and perspectives, and really open his mind when he's already considered himself to have known and experienced so much that being with the Inquisition was ultimately such a net positive for him. The only thing that really kind of derailed him was when his friend, who was a wisdom spirit, got, you know, transformed into something vile and grotesque. And I would always allow Solas to do what he needed to do to the mages who tormented his wisdom friend. But he was never the same at that point. Losing his friend like that was really what I believe kind of turned the key in many ways for Solas to, because I think he was well on the lines of, you know what, I really shouldn't tear down the veil before that point happened, because he was so close knit with people and really began to realize that through everything coming together to defeat Corypheus, that maybe the world was worth saving in its current state. That he didn't need to repeat the sins of the past in many ways until that wisdom spirit thing happened. And I really think that that was the point of where the key just started. It was like, screw it. Nope, Veil's still going down. Original plan was still intact. And his ultimate reveal of stealing part of Flemeth was one of those shocking moments that lives rent free in my head and will probably always live rent free in my head, because it was such a, you just didn't see the Dreadwolf stuff coming. I certainly just did not see the Dreadwolf stuff coming any given point in time. And the way they robbed Solas of his depth, of his arc, of his meaning in the Veilguard will probably go down in analysis history as being one of the most tragic derailments of a character in the franchise. 100%. Like, to this day, I can't tell you the names of anybody who was on the Veilguard. And murdering Varric in the first 5 minutes, diabolical work. Does nothing for anybody. Like, diabolical work. All I know is that we have Bird Boy with the Griffin is a warden. We have Dead Dude. We have Assassin Dude. We have Scared Harding. We have Nev. We have Cash. I think that's it. It's probably not it, but I think that's it. So, me only remembering the names of like 3 people is it's not great in terms of how I feel about the Veilguard. There was no banter within the Veilguard, which Inquisition was chock full of banter. Most of my time in Inquisition, I kid you not, is still just me wandering around, listening to everybody bond, because people bond the more you take them out together. Like, Dorian and Iron Bull end up canonically in a relationship at the end of Inquisition because you kept them in your party long enough. If you put Iron Bull and Vivienne together, the banter there is immaculate because he is just so straight-laced around her. It is yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, absolutely not, ma'am. And where there is tension, either politically or epistemologically, or just somebody doing stuff that they, you know, ought not to do, Varric is always the one who kind of has the quip that smooths things over. And watching relationships get better throughout Inquisition and deeper is something that RPGs in general don't spend a lot of time doing. Even Baldur's Gate 3, for the level of depth that it has, everybody's interconnection, you don't really get to see developed while out in the wild. There's no party banter in the same way. And, hearing Dorian and Iron Bull hitting each other is one of the best things that I've ever heard, because let's face it, Tevinter and the Cune have been at war with each other for eons. These are 2 people who are fundamentally opposed to each other's existence, and end up getting together by the end of it. It's brilliant. It's great. I love it. As a piece of writing, I love it. And there's so much evolution of everybody working together and having to navigate each other as a team. Like, finding out that Cassandra's actually a real fan of Varric's books, to a point that there's a side mission of you find Cassandra reading some of Varric's smut. Well, it's probably not even smut, but just some low quality writing, as Varric calls it. But deciding that because Cassandra is so invested that he will write it simply just for her, even though those 2 have been at each other's throats since the beginning because of Hawk. To see that evolution is something that you just don't get with the Veilguard. It's something that you don't get in most games. And while I understand people preferring Origins for its level of, top down, really precise battle management, I love that for those people. But for the depth of what you get in terms of interconnectivity and the very human elements of what it's like to have such a diverse group of people coming together to try to work together, is something that just cannot be captured and has not been captured in any game since. The closest, I think, has been Final Fantasy 15, but that is a podcast for another day. This has been Thinking Through the Darkness, a Lore by Spec production with me, Spec. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me today. Just as a reminder, don't forget, if you haven't followed the Lore by Spec YouTube channel, go ahead and subscribe. It's free there. If you haven't taken the time to review the podcast or dropped a like and a comment, those really help too. And if you ever feel inclined to help me keep the lights on over here, head to Ko-Fi, which is in my description, to help support the podcast. Once again, thank you all so very much for listening, and I will see you all next time.